There's a specific feeling that shows up after about 6 months of serious app use. It doesn't have a name most people give it. It feels like boredom. A little. It feels like disappointment, but underneath both of those, there's something quieter and harder to describe. A kind of flatness where something used to move. You can still go through the motions, download, match, message, meet. But the part of you that used to feel something when a conversation started going well, it responds differently now. Slower, more guarded, more like an analyst than someone actually present. And if you've noticed that, if you've felt that shift and couldn't explain it, this video is specifically about what happened, not as a character observation, as neuroscience. Because what the apps do to the brain over repeated use is documented, specific, and almost nobody talks about it in a way that's actually useful. By the end of this, you'll have a name for what you've been feeling. And more importantly, you'll understand why it's not a reflection of who you are. Let's start with what you probably thought was happening. The explanations most people reach for make sense on the surface. You've been on the apps too long. You've had too many disappointing conversations. You've matched with people who looked promising and went nowhere. You've invested in someone, felt it building, and then watched it dissolve into a slow fade or a sudden silence. Of course you feel burned out. That explanation, the accumulation of disappointment explanation, is not wrong. It's just incomplete, because the part of this that most people can't fully account for isn't the disappointment you expected. Disappointment was always part of the deal. You knew that going in. What you didn't expect was what happened to the part of you that existed before the disappointment, the part that used to feel something before you knew whether things were going to work out. The openness, the low-level excitement of early connection, the willingness to be present with someone without cataloging everything they say and monitoring your own responses simultaneously. That's the part that went quiet. And that's the part that's hard to explain to someone who hasn't been through it. Because it doesn't feel like sadness exactly. It feels more like a faculty that used to work and now doesn't respond the way it used to. Most people, when they notice this, reach for one of two explanations. The first is external. The apps are just full of the wrong people. The solution is to try a different one, a more serious one where people are actually looking for something real. The second is internal, and this is the one that does the damage. Something about prolonged disappointment has made them harder to reach, less capable of feeling, damaged in some quiet and possibly permanent way. The second explanation is the one that keeps people up at night. And here's what's important. It's also the one that's most wrong about what's actually happening. So let's talk about what really happens in the brain. To understand what actually happens, you need to understand one thing about how the brain's reward system works. The brain does not respond most strongly to rewards it receives reliably. It responds most strongly to rewards it receives unpredictably. This is one of the most replicated findings in behavioral neuroscience. Variable reward schedules produce stronger and more compulsive behavioral responses than fixed ones. A slot machine pays out less often than a vending machine. But nobody becomes addicted to vending machines. Swipe-based apps were built deliberately with full knowledge of this research around a variable reward structure. Most matches lead nowhere. Most conversations stall. Most connections dissolve. But occasionally, something. A message that lands differently. A match that feels like it might matter. That occasional reward, unpredictable, irregular, just frequent enough to sustain the behavior, is what keeps the loop running. And the brain adapts to that loop. Here's what that adaptation actually looks like from the inside. Over time, the baseline level of dopamine response in the brain's reward system recalibrates downward to match the environment it's in. What this means practically: experiences that would previously have felt genuinely exciting, meeting someone at a party, having a conversation that moves naturally into unexpected territory, feeling the specific warmth of someone looking at you like they actually see you, begin to register as less significant than they used to. Not because those experiences have changed, because your brain's ability to respond to them has been recalibrated by months or years of processing stimulation at a different pace and in a different format. This is the flatness with real people, the one that feels like the chemistry isn't there, like the connection is fine but not quite enough. Like maybe you've just become someone who doesn't feel things as easily anymore. That is not you becoming colder. That is a learned response pattern, built by the system, not by you. And there's a second mechanism running alongside the first one, because the apps don't just rewire the reward system, they also train the threat assessment system. Every early interaction on a dating app is implicitly an evaluation. You are assessing, You are being assessed. The entire context is structured around, is this person worth continuing with? Are they going to disappoint me? How quickly can I tell? Do that for long enough, and the brain begins to apply that same threat assessment framework to early romantic interest everywhere, which means someone new enters your life, someone you actually find interesting, and instead of simply being there with them, something in you has already opened a file, not as a flaw, as a response. The brain learned correctly in the context of the apps that early connection is a risk environment that requires vigilance. It is now applying that lesson in contexts where it doesn't serve you. That's the mechanism. That's what's been happening. Now here's the part nobody says out loud. There's a part of this that's harder to say, and it's the part that matters most. Somewhere in the course of all of this, the swiping, the evaluating, the hoping, and the withdrawing, most people lost touch with a version of themselves they didn't realize they were losing. The version that could meet someone and simply be curious about them. The version that could feel attraction without immediately calculating the risk. The version that could sit in early connection, uncertain, unresolved, not yet knowing how it would go, and find that uncertainty interesting rather than threatening. That version of you is not gone, but something in you believes it might be. And that belief, quiet, rarely spoken out loud, usually surfacing on Sunday evenings or in the moment after a date that was fine but felt like nothing, is the real weight. Not the apps themselves, not the bad matches, not the accumulated disappointment. The suspicion that you used to be someone who could feel this more easily, and that person has been replaced by someone more defended, more analytical, more tired. Here's what neuroscience actually says about that. The same plasticity that allowed the brain to adapt to the app environment, to build those hypervigilant, low dopamine baseline threat-assessing response patterns, is still there. The brain does not lose its capacity for recalibration when the environment changes. What it needs is not a break. What it needs is a different kind of input, sustained long enough to register as the new normal, which means the version of you that could feel things more freely wasn't a younger, more naive version of yourself that's been correctly replaced by experience. It was a version of you operating in a different neurological environment. And environments can change. The pattern doesn't mean what you think it means. It does not mean you've been damaged into someone incapable of connection. It means your brain is doing exactly what brains do, adapting to the conditions they've been given. And conditions can be changed. If this is landing as something you want to actually move through, not just understand, there's a 7-day guided reset in the description built specifically for this moment. It's called the Swipe Detox, not an app cleanse, not a motivation challenge. A structured process for recalibrating the specific patterns this video just named, step by step, from the inside out. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. So what actually starts to reverse it? The question that comes next, the one that's probably already forming, is, so what actually helps? And the honest answer is, not what most people try. Most people, when they feel the burnout clearly enough, delete the apps, which is a reasonable response. And it does produce relief. Real, genuine relief. At least for the first day or two. But deletion alone is absence, not recalibration. The brain doesn't reset its reward baseline simply because the stimulus is removed. Anyone who has taken a 2-week break from the apps and come back feeling exactly the same already knows this. The break gave you space. It didn't change what the space felt like. What actually begins to reverse the pattern is something more specific than abstinence. It's the sustained, repeated experience of connection that moves at a different pace. Conversation that doesn't have an evaluation structure built into it. Interaction with people where the question of romantic potential is not the organizing frame. At least not immediately. Not because romantic connection is the problem, but because the brain needs enough repetitions of a different kind of human interaction to begin recalibrating what interaction feels like when it isn't structured as an assessment. This is slower than most people want it to be. There's no version of this where the recalibration happens in a weekend. But here's what's worth knowing. The shift doesn't require the process to be complete before it starts to feel different. The first small signs of recalibration. The first time you notice yourself actually present in a conversation with someone new. Not cataloging them, not threat assessing, just there. Those come earlier than you'd expect. They're quiet, they don't announce themselves, but they're the beginning of the whole thing. The other piece, and this one matters, is what you do with the specific internal moment when the hypervigilance activates. Because it will, even as things shift. You'll meet someone you like. Something will feel promising. And the familiar machinery will start running, monitoring for signs, constructing stories from silences, waiting to see if this is going to be another thing that disappoints. When that happens, and it will, the most useful thing is not to try to stop the machinery. It's to notice it. Name what story is forming in your head about what the silence means. Not to change it immediately. Not to force yourself to feel calm, just to look at it directly. That act of looking, that's not a small thing. That's the brain beginning to get the distance it needs from its own patterns. And that distance, that slight gap between the automatic response and the one you actually choose, is where everything starts to shift. If you want a structured path through exactly what this video opened, the Swipe Detox in the description is built for this specific moment. 7 days, one step at a time. The link is in the description and in the pinned comment. When did you first notice the flatness? The moment you realized you were going through the motions without feeling what you used to feel. Before this video ends, there's something worth saying directly. You came here with a suspicion. The suspicion that something has changed in you. That the version of yourself that could feel hope easily, that could meet someone new and simply be curious rather than braced, that version has been quietly replaced by someone more defended, more tired, more convinced that the connection they want is probably not coming. That suspicion felt like self-knowledge. It isn't. What it actually is an accurate reading of your current neurological state, misattributed to your character. The brain that adapted to the app environment adapted because it was designed to adapt, because that is what brains do when given consistent input over time. And the input those systems were designed to deliver, the variable reward, the constant evaluation, the low-grade ambient threat of being assessed and found wanting, is genuinely difficult input to process without it leaving a mark. The mark is real. The thing it does not mean is, this is who you are now. You are not someone who has been damaged into incapacity. You are someone whose capacity has been temporarily reorganized by an environment that was specifically designed to keep you inside it. That reorganization is not permanent. The same brain that learned to move through the world this way can learn to move through it differently. Not as a project, not as a healing arc with a finish line, just as the slow accumulation of different experiences repeated often enough to register as the new normal. You've probably already felt this part, the moment in a conversation, however brief, where the machinery went quiet and you were simply there. That wasn't an accident. That was your brain showing you what it still knows how to do. The version of you that moves through early connection with curiosity instead of vigilance. That person is not someone you have to become. That person is already inside the pattern, waiting for enough different input to surface. You're closer to that than the flatness makes it feel. And that's the beginning of the whole thing.